Welcome to Chapter 14, Risk Management and Worker Protection. After having some weighted chapters from the previous, 12 and 13, you'll get a breather with the Chapter 14. It's engaging as far as your mind can see applicability in real time as far as your own reference points, probably a little bit more so than some of the inner workings that were shared in the two prior lectures. So you can breathe a little easier. By the time you're done reading this chapter, you should be able to understand risk management and its components, the legal areas regarding safety and health and why they're important, outlining the provisions of OSHA and record keeping and inspection requirements, recognize the activities that constitute effective safety management, list 3 workplace health issues and highlight how companies are responding to them, define workplace security concerns and elements of an effective security program, describe the nature and importance of disaster preparation and recovery planning for HR. So risk management involves responsibility as it's tied to physical, human, and financial factors that you need to be concerned with, both of the organizational and the individual's interest. We're concerned about preventing accidents and health problems at work. That's a given. What we may not consider is how do we plan for terrorism attack and workplace violence, not just with an employee having to deal with an outsider coming in, but also when an employee is having to deal with someone from within who is being violent. Ensuring HR data is secured and anticipating any outbreaks globally of a disease and how we prepare for natural disasters. So this is not Maslow's hierarchy of needs. I know I joke about this throughout the semester as far as how these pyramids, a lot of people think of that. That's what's been embedded in our mind, especially if you've been taking various psychology, sociology, and business courses. This right here is the 3 facets that make up our risk management: health, safety, and security. And under health, we should be concerned about your physical, mental, and emotional well-being. This right here is a flag for me because there are a great number of companies that say this, but they really are not fully invested in that. And when we go throughout the rest of the chapter, you'll see why. I'll bring it back up. Safety. Of course, we're concerned about your physical well-being to make sure you're protected from harm. Security, making sure that our team and the facilities are free from any forces that may harm them. And so we have some various legal concerns tied to safety and health, such as the workers' comp legislation, ADA, child labor laws, civil rights non-discrimination provisions, and collective bargaining laws. Under workers' comp, the company purchases insurance to compensate you, the employee, for any injuries that you receive while you're on the job. And the payments required may help cover your time away from work because of an illness, right? So it's going to give you payments for that, to cover your medical bills and any retraining if it's required due to the accident or incident. Figure 14.2 shows you the elements of workers' comp benefits, and I'm going to enhance this so that you can see closer. Under medical care, of course, I mentioned the medical treatment. You can see the replacement income, retraining cost, and there at the bottom is survivor benefits. In case you're killed on the job, there should be benefits that cover your family's needs or a pay that goes to them. Now, under ADA, we have some safety issues. Companies should be focused on trying to return injured workers only after they're recovered and they're healed and a doctor has signed off, not to reduce workers' comp costs. You don't try to encourage, bully, intimidate, influence an employee to come back to work to do their job, and you know they're injured, and you're trying to avoid having to pay additional cost, the premiums tied to workers' comp. So when making accommodations for injured employees through restricted duty work, essential job functions are undercut. And it's important that companies take an ethical approach of how would I want to be treated, right? If we did that every single time, we wouldn't have that issue. HR professionals understand ADA guidelines as they affect physical disabilities. Where we can have some problems is when it's dealing with mental issue. Why? Because it's so complex and so varied. And as you'll see in upcoming slide, you can confuse mental illness signs and symptoms with signs and symptoms of substance abuse. Child labor laws. We have FLSA, which sets restrictions on the work for younger workers. There are penalties if a company violates these restrictions, and it can be very costly. There has been an increase in work-related, or I should say, not an increase. There's been a focus on work-related injuries of teenage workers, and it's an issue because it's still an issue. And looking closely at the ways in which we put teenage workers at risk is something that's constantly being measured. And of course, I will have a sense of sarcasm at some point when I get to this other slide that's coming up. I'm just warning you now. So with that, we have to make sure that our managers and employees are properly trained. The reason we have these laws is because we used to violate them. Even when I was a preteen and teen, a lot of these restrictions were not in place. And I remember working hours that nowadays I wouldn't be able to work. But at any age, and here's the funny thing, you can deliver newspapers. Well, in the most parts of our country, this job has been taken back by adults who are doing the job, and children are no longer doing it. You can work as an entertainer. I feel like that should be expanded upon because someone can really manipulate that. And you can work for a family-based farm or any other business that's owned and operated by your parents. And you cannot work in manufacturing or mining jobs regardless of who owns the company. So that means that your family can basically work you at any days and hours of the day, regardless if you fall into any of these age categories. What's interesting, and here comes my sarcasm, is that at age 18, that's the minimum age for employment in a hazardous occupation. And so you're no longer subject to child labor provisions. Why? Because you're now legally adult. So you can work in a hazardous occupation. You can join the military, but you cannot drink alcohol legally. So that's the one hazard that we want to still keep our grips on. But that's just my sarcasm with that. It's interesting because I sit back and I'm like, although yes, legally you are now an adult, is your mind mentally ready to have a hazardous occupation? But, we've had young people in the military as young as 16, 17, of course, lying about their age. But I think it's just so much that you can, thrust at a person at an age that anyway. But this may also be somewhat tied to the concerns that we have as it pertains to work-related injuries. Now, that doesn't mean that you're not being injured in between these categories, but definitely when you get to this level here, you are shortening your odds. Now, when we look at reproductive health, a company should not prevent you from working in a job that is deemed hazardous to reproductive concerns, but they should maintain the safest work conditions or methods, comply with laws, inform you of your risk, and make sure that they document that you accept those risks. You can always, always, always refuse unsafe work, making sure that you state that that's the reason why. When we look about the work that we do around the world, we have to make sure that we are considering how we can protect our employees from assault, disease, theft, poor health care, and various disasters, how we can address tax and immigration risk, and any kind of dangerous working conditions, because what is deemed acceptable here, what the standards are here, are not necessarily the standards elsewhere, and some of our standards may be slack and limited compared to some other countries that may have even more stringent rules, and then some other countries that barely have any rules and laws protecting workers. So you have to be mindful of that. Under OSHA, it was enacted to protect workers, and it administers provisions of the law. That's what the administration does. The Institute for Occupational Safety and Health develops the various safety standards, and then there's a review commission that reviews the actions of OSHA. So we look at the enforcement of safety regulations, and since 2003, there has been a decline in incidences. You have to, as an employer, adhere to the general duty to provide a safe and healthy working condition. You have to provide posters and any notices that inform your employees of safety and health standards as established by OSHA. When you look at the figure 14.4 in your textbook, it shows the decline, and you see it's been a steady kind of a little blurb that went up around 2011, but it's, now it's going back down. But you can see a decline from compared to 2004. You also see DART, which are the days away from work and transfers. And you can see any other recordable cases, which we'll talk about shortly. Now, the fatalities, you see that they, from 2004, they dropped down in 2009 and kind of went up just a little bit from 2010 to 2012, and then they've gone back down 2013. Still higher than what it was in 2009, but still lower than 2004 to 2008. And these are all, of course, recorded fatalities, and these are all recorded non-fatal injuries and illnesses that were recorded. Now we look at standards. We have our enforcement standards from OSHA, hazard communication, addressing bloodborne pathogens, personal protective equipment, and if there's any, if there is a pandemic, how to handle that, the different guidelines. We look at the categories. We have 4 categories of injuries: death, any injury that causes you to be away from work, any injury or illness that causes you to have to transfer your job or be placed on restrictive duty, and then there's the other recordable cases, and I'll go into that in a moment. When we look at how we go about recording a case, OSHA wants to know if whether or not the incident, if it was resulted from a work accident and or exposure in the work environment or not. If it did result from a work accident or exposure in the work environment, there are 3 categories that they're going to focus on. Did the accident or exposure lead to death, illness, or injury? If it led to death or illness, immediately you record the case. If it led to injury, they need to know, was there any medical treatment other than first aid? Was there a loss of consciousness, restriction of work or motion, transfer to another job, or none of the above. If none of the above, you don't record it. If one of the other four took place, your medical treatment, a doctor, there's medical treatment provided, there was loss of consciousness, you were restricted to work or motion, or you were transferred, then it has to be recorded. But if that case did not result from a work accident or exposure, or the injury involved was none of these, then they don't record it. And I know the question is, well, why does it say other than first aid? Well, that's the severity of it. If you just bumped and you scraped your knee and you put a Band-Aid on it and it's first aid, they don't have to record it. So that's that, all right? Let me slide this back over. Now, when a compliance officer comes to do an on-the-spot inspection, this is how you go about dealing with them. First, you need to check their credentials and make sure they really are from OSHA, because just because someone comes to your facility and says they're from OSHA doesn't mean they are. I can say I'm Wonder Woman. That doesn't mean that I am. You need to have the initial conference with them, review the safety records, and they'll conduct the on-the-spot inspection. And then if there's any violations, they will issue you a citation. Now, there are 3 levels of the citations and violations. One is imminent danger. That's where there's a reasonable certainty that whatever the condition that they found would possibly lead to death or serious physical harm if that condition is not corrected immediately. Serious means the condition could probably cause death or harm of severity, and the employer should know the condition, right? Other than serious is when the impact of the health or safety of your employees is clear, but it probably would not cause death or serious harm. We have de minimis. In a lot of the laws that we still use and what we recycle is we like to use Latin. Is minimum, right? The condition is not directly and immediately related to the safety or health of your employees. Willful and repeated is when you as the employer, you have been cited before for this issue and you have not complied. You have not made changes, improvements, nothing. And so that means that you are willfully repeating this offense. Now, most common violations are related to fall protection, hazard communication, scaffolding, respiratory protection, and powered industrial trucks. I am interested in doing further research to see if whether or not people that are employed to do scaffolding, if they are eligible for their life insurance. Because I believe that would be like a risky career path, because you know that the risk of falling and dying or severely injuring yourself is much greater than you working in a cubicle in an office. So I'd like to check further into that. Now, when we look at safety management, there are steps that we can take to reduce accidents. Having a commitment organization-wide to safety, establishing and enforcing policies, discipline, and record keeping, providing adequate and intensive safety training, and making sure that we're communicating fully and effectively, having safety committees, and I'm going to go further into what that entails, and also inspection, investigation, and evaluation internally, your own team, not waiting for OSHA to come on site. Like, no, this is something that you should have done on a consistent basis. And then, of course, reducing accidents using the technology of ergonomics, which some of you may actually have experienced in some of your workplaces, where they're being mindful of the different things that, back, neck, wrist, leg strain, carpal tunnel, and providing you with the proper desk and chairs and other devices to help eliminate, reduce, and possibly avoid those issues. So here's our iceberg, and this right here is an example of the 3 levels of cost that you have to be concerned about with risk management: direct, indirect, and immeasurable. Under direct, of course, we've already talked about the medical. It's all the direct things that you can think of: any fines for safety violations, damage to work equipment. Indirect would be the administration of claims, time and production lost by coworkers, right? Because coworkers have to now pick up the slack from the missing worker. Time lost by the supervisor, cost to replace injured workers and train new ones. The immeasurable costs are the negative publicity and damaged reputation. You can't put a dollar on that, right? There's no way to know exactly how much it's going to cost you. And you also, when we look back up at direct cost, the cost tied to workers' compensation premiums, right? I wanted to make sure I covered that. So safety management. We have to make sure that top management is not only supportive, but that it is something that they're helping to be the driver of. If any major decision, any major policy that, or program or process or system that you want the rest of the company to embrace, to take on, it has to be driven by top management. It has to be seen, felt, and heard that top management is serious about it in order for it to be embraced. And so the frequent reinforcing of safe behavior is what helps you to establish and reinforce policies and discipline and record keeping. And by providing adequate training and communication steps and procedures in how to address issues and incidents, it can help reduce the number of accidents. Creating the safety committee is really important. It needs to be endorsed and supported by senior leaders, and managers need to actively assist with supporting the committee, making sure that you have safety advocates on the committee. What's the purpose of having a committee if the people that are part of the committee aren't really concerned about safety? They're more concerned about how we can keep costs low. When you're so focused on keeping costs low, that's when you start making unethical decisions that then impact safety. So you need to have people on board who are huge advocates of safety. And of course, making sure that you have adequate representation from both employees and management. Under inspection, investigation, and evaluation, as I mentioned earlier, is having the regular inspections performed internally by your team and making sure that research on prevention is arranged so that you're always staying abreast of the newest and latest. Under the investigation process for any accidents, there's an emergency response where you secure the site, you then review the site, collect any data and historical records from the injured worker and witnesses. You then analyze that data and you determine what caused it, what caused the accident. From there, you institute corrective measures to possibly reduce or avoid that accident from occurring again. How we use ergonomics, as I mentioned earlier, they really helps to create a work environment that deals with the physical demands that are placed on its workers, and doing so while they're performing their jobs, not after. So how we can go about approaches for effective safety management is making sure that it's covered organizationally through the realm of engineering, and then how we do so individually. For the organizational approach, it's designing safe jobs, using safety committees, creating a safety culture, establishing reward and recognition programs for safety. Under engineering is designing those appropriate work settings, applying the ergonomic principles, evaluating and use of the equipment and assistive devices, and implementing safety procedures in the workplace tied to, from an engineering standpoint. And then individual is reinforcing those safety motivation and attitudes, and providing the training, rewarding through incentive programs, and discussing safety frequently during meetings and, of course, throughout the work site. So when we look at how we measure safety efforts, we're looking at statistics from accidents and injuries. We're looking at the per injury or per illness cost tied to workers' comp, the percentage of illness and injuries that are broken up by department, by shift, and by job. And then we have an incident rate and benchmark comparisons, so that you can see by incident and over a certain period of time. Now, I talked earlier about our health and wellness, and we talked about mental health and how it could be harder to put a finger on. When we look at substance abuse, it's, of course, the misuse of controlled substances, alcohol, other drugs, or even illicit substances. And there's different tests that can be used to determine what drugs that you're on. There are some common signs of substance abuse, but as you'll see, some of these signs can be confused with mental health. You can have the slurred speech, the tiredness. Psychologically, you could be depressed, helpless, feelings of insecurity, difficulty remembering details. Behaviorally, you could be inconsistent, miss deadlines, high absenteeism, especially on Mondays and Fridays, frequently borrow money, poor job performance. Interactional could be violence, bullying, argumentative behavior, overreacting, irritability. I know some people that are absolute bullies, but they don't drink, smoke, take drugs, or anything. They're just bullies, and they make hostile work environments wherever they go. And most likely it's tied to more mental illness or mental health issue than it would be tied to substance abuse. But can you see how you can confuse the two? So other employee health concerns, of course, would involve stress and smoking at work. When we look at specific events, they can be tied to a person who otherwise would be able to cope successfully with life pressure, but something can trigger them to have, a meltdown, or just kind of go within, or an outburst. And affected employees can be referred to outside resources through EAPs. Stress is a biggie. And in my Management 1100 class, I usually, by the third week of class, I usually advance our textbook to the chapter that covers stress. Because for me, it's important that we address this huge problem that most organizations are rarely concerned about until you have an incident. And then at that point, when the media is there doing, their investigative reporting, and they ask, well, did you know, what do you think caused Bill to snap? And then you start to try to unpack Bill. Well, guess what? What could you have done to help reduce the physical or psychological reactions that Bill was subjected to? It's the most common reason for why we take long terms off from work. It's when we're stressed out, it manifests in different illnesses, and we're just focused on the illnesses and not realizing that it's stress. When we look at smoke, a lot of companies have instituted no smoking policies. Organizations want to help improve job performance, reduce health-related expenses, and promote healthier lifestyles. It does cost companies to have to pay for your healthcare needs when you're a smoker. The FDA hasn't had extensive oversight over e-cigarettes and the vape culture yet. So the status is still complicated on that, because some people will try to say it was not really a cigarette, but as I will always say is that it emits a substance that spreads outward that the rest of us can inhale, that seep through our pores. So it should fall along the lines of smoking. Health promotion, wellness programs, and EAPs. Health promotion is a supportive approach of being able to facilitate and encourage healthy actions and lifestyles. Wellness programs are designed to maintain or improve your health before a problem arises. And EAP is, as I mentioned earlier, where you can get counseling and other help to help with any problems that you have emotionally or physically or anything else. Under EAP, it should help reduce expenses associated with benefits and enhance organizational well-being, because as you're feeling better and getting better, your performance should be increasing. Some of the common issues tied to EAPs are child care and elder care, mental health and substance abuse, relationship issues, legal and financial problems, and career advice. Figure 1412 shows you some of the health promotion levels 1 to 3. And under level 1, let me slide this over, it's looking at how we provide information and awareness through brochures and materials, special events and classes. Level 2, we are then now upgrading to lifestyle and wellness, where we provide different incentives, support groups, EAPs, education programs and classes. And then level 3, of course, is now going to focus on a health emphasis of integrating the benefits within your programs and providing dedicated facilities and resources and having curriculum that's tied to health education. Now, some concerns that we have when it's tied to security. Of course, we're always concerned about workplace violence, how we can manage our security, and the processes and systems tied to it, how we can screen and select employees with security in mind, and the security personnel that we have watching out for all of us. And as I mentioned earlier in this lecture, workplace violence, not just being concerned about an external person coming into your place of employment and being violent towards employees. It's also looking at employees who are being violent towards other employees, employees who could be violent towards, a third party. So all of that is tied in. When you look at the academic setting, it's us being concerned about an outsider coming onto the campus and being violent. We're having to also be mindful of students who could be violent towards other students, students who could be violent towards instructors, and then we're having to think about the case or not even just instructors, the case of students being violent against faculty and staff, and then looking at the case of faculty and staff and the workplace violence that could take place if one of the staff members or faculty members is violent towards anyone. So there's so many different concerns and different viewpoints to have to examine and to address. Doing a security audit allows you to do a review of your security from top to bottom, inside and out, and managing that process involves the audit, controlling access to your facilities and to your HR data, screening job applicants, and providing trained security personnel. The screening the job applicants is a big issue. Because some people are very lazy in how they bring in applicants. Some people don't even go through verifying references. It's to the point where why are you even requesting references if you're not going to call and verify? If you're not going to verify that person actually went to the University of Georgia, why? I mean, like, they could put anything. They could put Yale, right? So it's making sure that you're going through the proper steps to protect yourself, your team, the people that you serve, and the community at large. Now, there's some prevention training focused on violence where it should involve all of your team members, and everyone should be trained on how to recognize signs of a potentially violent employee, but also a potentially violent customer, a potentially violent student. Like it has to be all the variables of who could be potentially violent at the workplace, and what to do when violence occurs. Some various warning signs and characteristics should be addressed so that employees know how to recognize them. And rude behavior that offends other employees would be deemed as workplace incivility. You're not being civil. Bullying is anytime someone perceives that they're being oppressed, humiliated, threatened, or infringed. And it occurs over an extended period of time. This could be something that you perceive that's happening to you or anyone else. And then, of course, how do you go about dealing with the violence is developing different policies and practices to prevent and respond to it, to train managers and provide examples, create a violence response team, and develop some response plans post the violent act. And some 3 levels of warning signs to look for. Early level is level 1, any kind of intimidation, bullying, verbal abuse, uncooperative. When it's escalated, you see there's some arguments with customers, coworkers, management. If someone's insubordinate, they're trying to sabotage equipment or steal property to have revenge. There's threats in writing or verbally. Then when there's further escalation, you're at level 3. When there's threats of suicide, homicide, any kind of physical altercation, destruction of property, extreme rage, if someone is brandishing a weapon to harm others. And honestly, they have to put that because sadly enough, when you are in a state where anyone can have a weapon outwardly or concealed, it has to be a case where they're brandishing it in a way where you're perceiving that they have an intent to harm other people. Under our disaster preparation and recovery planning, you have pre-crisis, crisis, and post-crisis. Under pre-crisis, you're going to identify how crises can be avoided through proper preparation, risk assessment, and disaster prevention. And did I say crises? I just thought about that. Yeah, you can play that one back and put it on loop. So yeah, identify how crises. There you go. Then under crisis, it's crafting a plan that enables you as the company to identify and respond to the crisis. And then post-crisis is how you can better respond to the same crisis or something similar if it were to happen again. There are some elements of a disaster plan, the assessment of the organization and doing a full wide assessment, how the impact on humans internally and externally, planning for that, the disaster training and how to handle a disaster, how to be prepared before a disaster takes place, and what to do after the impact. Some various topics to consider, or not consider, that you should, that you should have embedded in your plan would be first aid CPR, which seems normal, right? But also how to contain hazardous materials, the means to escape during a disaster, what methods for employee contact, how you're going to, and that means employee being able to make sure that you can reach each other, but also how employees can be able to reach out as well in case the lines are cut off. You need to be able to find internally and externally how contact can be made, as well as making sure that you have updated contact information, emergency contact information for employees when you need to be able to reach out to their family. And then, of course, you have organization restoration efforts that need to be factored in to be able to restore the company back to it standing before the disaster. Then when we're planning for disease, understanding that the nature of global travel has increased our spread of various viruses. And so we have to be mindful of how we can go about evacuating our employees from locations where flu and other airborne or, you know, easily spread viruses and diseases can occur, and protecting local employees if flu symptoms occur within an area. This is really interesting because we have flu season all the time in the U.S., and I don't see organizations shutting down operations or having people that have the flu not come to work until they have a doctor's note showing they don't have the flu. More time than not, you have employers who are saying, okay, you're fine, and this person's now wiping out, a floor of coworkers. So it's one of those things that when you're really putting, as I've said before in the very beginning, if you're really putting the health and well-being of your employees really at the top of that list, as it was on the chart, then all of these things kind of fall into place. So with that is the end of this lecture. If you have any questions, please email me. Thank you.